Welcome to your Thursday edition of Strip Sports Daily Delivery. I am Michael Rand. A lot to get to today. Right off the bat, let's jump right into what did you miss? Karl-Anthony Towns returns for the Timberwolves. In Wednesday's game, a loss to the Clippers. 119 to 112 is your final score. The Wolves look really good in the first half. Towns scores 18 points, but they kind of run out of gas in the second half and end up losing that game. Far more important than that, though, is Towns' recovery from COVID-19. I don't want to just gloss over, Towns is back. Now let's talk about basketball. We're going to get to that in a little bit with my first guest, Bobby Marks, ESPN front office insider. We'll talk a whole lot about where the Wolves go from here, kind of what their trade prospects are, what this roster looks like. But before we spin too far forward, we got to remember, Karl-Anthony Towns missed almost a month here, and there's a good reason for that. He talked after the game about how serious this was for him, not only having had several family members, including his mother, pass away from COVID, but because the bout he had himself sounds like it was pretty bad.
I've been here 6 years, and every single time it became a decision of doing what's best for me and what's best for the team and this organization. I've always picked this team and this organization, and at one point I got to start thinking for myself and taking care of myself. And obviously getting COVID stopped everything in its tracks and left me with a decision. And I picked, my family. This is something, I'm a high-risk case. COVID did not treat me well whatsoever. A lot of scary nights. My dad calling me 24/7.
And this is another high-profile athlete, right on top of Marco Rossi, the Wild prospect, being shut down for several weeks because of complications from COVID. So hopefully Towns is able to put all of this, both mentally and physically, behind him as the year goes on. I don't think it will be immediate by any stretch of the imagination. But let's remember, this is a player who, didn't have a lot of on-court adversity early in his career, at least in terms of injury. There was wins and losses problems early on when they were losing a whole bunch of games. But this is a guy who played all 82 games his first 3 seasons in the league, played 77 his next year. Really only last season was when, he started missing time and, having to work back from those things. So let's see how this goes for him. Hopefully he can put this all behind him and, mentally and physically become the person and player he wants to be on the court.
I'm Nyla Jean Myers, Senior Assistant Sports Editor at the Star Tribune. Thank you for listening to Strip Sports Daily Delivery. This work is made possible by our Star Tribune subscribers. For unlimited access to the articles mentioned in this podcast and our coverage of Minnesota sports from pros to preps, go to startribune.com/subscribe.
Very happy right now to bring in Bobby Marks, front office insider at ESPN, to help us kind of understand the landscape of the NBA. Trade deadline is next month, and some new players just became eligible to be traded a few days ago. Also want to talk a lot of Timberwolves with Bobby because that is the market we are in. Bobby, how are you doing? And welcome to the show.
I'm good, doing great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know this is maybe more of a deadline marker, but the players who signed free agent contracts in the off season are now eligible to be traded as of, I believe, Saturday. Does that change? How does that influence the market and the possible trade market as we think about moving ahead towards the deadline in late March?
Yeah, there were, as you said, there were 90 players that now are trade eligible. There's a little bit of a wrinkle where some players, I think there's about 20 that signed free agent contracts, still have a March 3rd restriction in their contract. Guys in Minnesota, Malik Beasley and Juancho Hernan-Gomez, because their contract was 120% more from the previous year. So they have a little bit of a later trade restriction date there. So we did open up the field. I think there's 93% of players that are trade eligible. The interesting thing with the February 6th date, which is in normal years is December 15th,
right,
was that there's never been a trade on that date. and we kept it going on Saturday where there wasn't a trade. It just opens up. I mean, teams are talking. It just kind of opens up the playing field where if something made sense, teams now have the flexibility to do it. the Derrick Rose trade that we saw on Sunday to New York for Dennis Smith Jr. in a second round pick, neither player had a restriction. That trade could have been made 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, but both felt that the timing was kind of right to do it.
Shocking that Thibodeau would go get Derrick Rose. I never would have imagined that.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting. And I said it when the trade happened. For Detroit, I just saw it as there was no risk there. When you get a second round pick and you have Dennis Smith, who you can basically use as an audition over the next 4 months. It's interesting as far as how New York uses Derrick. The flavor in New York is Emmanuel Quickley, who's played, well for a rookie, had some ups and downs, and they've had some good moments from Alec Burks, Elfrid Payton to start, and how does Rose kind of fit in there and not really steal away Quickley's minutes. But yeah, he gives you that safety blanket, I guess, insurance policy that Tibbs has had him in Chicago, Minnesota, and now in New York.
What do you think of this market as we? It's probably about 6-7 weeks till the deadline. Is this going to be? I think there'll be a lot of active teams. Are people kind of in wait and see mode? Have we already seen some of the biggest trades since obviously there was some big ones that materialized already? What do you think of the market this year?
Well, I'll sum it up this way. I'm about 90% in of my big trade guide that I put out every year. That will come out probably sometime at the end of February, and it's this 12,000 word manuscript on everything.
Always look forward to that.
And it was the most challenging one to write since I've been in the media in the last 5 years, just because I could write about Bradley Beal, but realistically, Bradley Beal is not getting traded. So what I try to do is put myself in the philosophy of why he's not going to get traded. And I think there'll be some trimming around the edges type trades. I mean, we certainly saw the Rose trade. I think what hurts the trade market is that the play-in game, now we have teams that are in that 9 and 10 seed that maybe in the past they would be sellers, right? That now there's a realistic chance that maybe the Bulls are going to get the 10th seed, and it's important for them to kind of keep that roster intact as far as a play-in for a play-in game. Maybe it's Memphis or some of these other teams. So I think that kind of throws a little bit of cold water over that. As you said, most of the big trades have already happened with the Harden trade back in January. The other thing that hurts is, and Brian Windhorst from ESPN wrote a great piece, half the league has already traded, half of the teams in the league have traded first round picks in different years. So you can't trade first round picks in back-to-back years. You have teams like the Clippers, the Lakers, the Bucks that are hard capped, meaning they can't exceed a certain amount to take back salary. They're all three of those teams are pressed against it. So I think probably where we might see a little more activity is probably that buyout market when we get post trade deadline in end of March, early April, where maybe teams start to fall out of the contention a little bit, and teams can sign basically players for free without giving up anything.
Almost exactly a year ago, as it were, the Timberwolves made a bunch of deals, and Gersson Rosas, their president, has shown a willingness to do that. It was almost a year ago when they made the D'Angelo Russell trade, when they got Beasley and the Covington deal, and maybe one other minor deal in there as well, where they basically turned over half the roster in a week. It's been a very weird year since then. That's an understatement. But as you see it, what's the plan in Minnesota right now from your perspective, and how is that vision taking shape in the limited amount of time we've been able to see it?
Yeah, in the Timberwolves, and I wrote them up in what I said about Minnesota. And you're right regarding Gersson, as far as probably one of the more active general managers, head of basketball operations. Certainly coming from that Houston tree with Daryl Morey, and I think Karl is the only player on that roster, right, as a holdover from when he came in, a year and a half ago. And it's hard for me to evaluate, even with a 6-18 record, what this roster looks like when your best player has played 4 games since February of 2020.
Yeah,
it really is. And, certainly how the season ended, and this year with Karl with injuries, and now with COVID, and how he fits into this group here, especially when you went out and spent $80 million plus on Malik and Juancho. You made the Rubio trade. You draft Anthony Edwards and Jaden McDaniels here, as far as how does that all fit in, right? Are you a top 4 team in the Western Conference? Probably not. But I don't think you're 6-18 and kind of sitting in the basement here. And you've got a little more continuity here. So it is hard to evaluate. On the other end, besides your number 1 pick and probably besides Karl, you have to listen to everything that teams call, even if there's something a team is calling regarding your best player right now, which is Malik Beasley. You have to listen to that. I think what's hurt a little bit is certainly D'Angelo.
Yeah.
Injuries, not playing at a high level that we saw probably in Brooklyn. He's playing not as a number 2. I mean, I don't even know if he's playing as a number 3 right now. That's hurt you in and out of the lineup here. So it's going to be interesting over the next, 6 weeks here. I think one of the things, if you are Minnesota and you basically have to be exploring teams that or players on teams that have kind of falling out of favor, whether it be injuries, whether it be on a contract they don't want, whether it be that player maybe it's just run its course, right? So I'll give an example. Aaron Gordon in Orlando, right? Aaron's only 25, but he's been down there 7 years. He's had some injuries, inconsistencies, and it's almost like trading your inconsistencies for another team's inconsistency, and maybe it works better for you here. And I'm not saying that Aaron, that Orlando is going to move Aaron, but that's just kind of an example here. But that's kind of the deals that you are looking at, as far as from your perspective, especially that you owe Golden State that number 1. You're not trading picks out with what's going on right now.
They can't trade a pick till 2024, right? Just because of the way that one's structured, because it could convey in 2022.
That's correct.
So based on that, it sounds like if you're waiting on, even if we've said Gersson is active, it feels like they're kind of in a waited out spot, but also that they can't just sit and be complacent when you're sitting in last place. So where do you think that leaves them ultimately?
Well, I think you peel back and you look at, besides what you drafted this year, where does, Josh Okogie, Jarrett Culver kind of fit in your timeline, as far as, with both players, 2 former picks, Ricky Rubio. It's hard for me to see him kind of going anywhere, but that's kind of, you're looking at big picture as far as your draft prospects, as far as how do they fit. I think there's been some good moments, certainly for, guys like Jalen Noel and Naz Reid. I think that's what happens when you have injuries, kind of teams, players step up. I think the goal is, especially for a guy like Anthony, is where he was when this thing started and where he ends up in mid-May.
Yeah. And
has he taken a big enough step from a developmental standpoint, throw out the record there for on the court? I think that is a primary focus, for this team over 3 or 4 months. But you're right. Yeah, you're in a holding pattern, but on the other end, you're not going to kind of unplug your phone come March 25th and not take calls.
Let's say it's March 26th. We're past the trade deadline, and I'm telling you the Wolves have made 1 trade. Are you most likely to believe that was a kind of a small fringe deal, a medium-sized deal, or a blockbuster?
I think probably more of a fringe deal. I think maybe it's, if you're clearing, you already have a roster spot, maybe you're clearing another roster spot, give you a little more flexibility under the luxury tax, and maybe go out and sign 2 players towards the end of the year, similar to what Miami did with Kendrick Nunn and Duncan Robinson, and kind of take a flyer and see if you have an audition for those type of players and, sign into one of these kind of longer type contracts here. It's hard for me to think that there's another blockbuster deal kind of up their sleeve. I mean, last year we saw the 4-team, 12-player trade that saw Minnesota get Beasley and Hernan Gomez in that trade.
Cat and D'Lo have played 4 games, I think 4 or 5 games together. They've never played more than 2 games consecutively since the D'Lo trade a year ago. So we don't know yet if that will work. Do you think that pairing works?
I do. I mean, but as you said, we need more of a body of work. I think I've seen D'Angelo play in LA. I saw him take off in Brooklyn. I know when there's another guy on the court with him where he doesn't have to do everything or, 50% of the heavy lifting, as I say, then with Karl, I think it will work here. But the question is when, right? Like how long are we waiting for as far as to see this pairing work? Because what's going to happen is that pretty soon that, D'Angelo Russell is going to he'll have 2 years left on his contract.
Yeah. And Karl
and then,
too.
I mean, and then what happens, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we know what happens. I mean, like I'm writing about Chicago and Zach LaVine, who's, kind of in the similar, Zach's got 2 years left, but, and what do you do? That's kind of like the logic says, well, shoot, if we're on a rebuild or retool roster and we're not going to make the playoffs, that's kind of when you take full advantage of that guy's trade value there and stuff. So I think you are in a little bit of a holding pattern, but I think the clock has certainly started as far as with these two players.
And that's interesting. I'm glad we kind of went there because I think the conventional wisdom with the Wolves this year was that they weren't going to be great, but I certainly think they expected to be better than they have been. And obviously the injury to Towns is, flashing light. That's number one in the why. But you're right. You wanted to make a certain amount of progress this year, and we haven't seen that yet. How important is it for them to show some of that progress in the last 40, 50 games? And then how important then does next year become? It feels always has felt to me like next year was kind of the make or break year, that you better be thinking you're going into that season making the playoffs, or this just doesn't feel like it's going to work.
Well, I always say that even if you're not going to make the playoffs, how do you put your players in a position to play meaningful minutes, right? Meaningful minutes, meaningful games. You're not just playing out the string. Is it playing against teams that are competing for a playoff spot where you have an advantage to maybe knock them out? I think what New York is kind of going through where, they're going to this group will probably play meaningful minutes, come April and May. They might not make the playoffs, but they're going to be in a position there. And I think that's the most important thing for Minnesota. It is to put these players in a position and use that as a real evaluation. And hopefully by, in the next couple of weeks, we get Karl back and we'll see what happens with this D'Angelo injury. If they're able to kind of be on the court and you get a true evaluation of what this roster really looks like.
A couple more things, then we'll finish up. One, any surprises in the positive direction on the Wolves? I think we've talked about some negative ones. I don't think Rubio has played very well at all. I don't think the fit is great. But who has maybe jumped out at you and said, "Boy, that he was better than I thought he would be," or "I didn't really see him coming at all"?
Well, I think the two guys I mentioned earlier, the two, and with Reed and Noel, as far as you just kind of, it's like that next man up, philosophy here where they have an opportunity and they've kind of slid in there, and the two players are on great contracts. Malik's played really well. I mean, there's no denying that how well he has. I think there's been some good minutes from Jaden McDaniels. I really do. And it's hard because, like I said this with all the rookies here, you got drafted at mid-November. You had no summer league. Yeah. You had no off season. These kids have not played really basketball since, I guess, March when COVID hit here. And now you're basically just asking them to kind of come into a situation in a condensed training camp and to be under the spotlight here. I think there's been some really good moments from him. I think Anthony has at times, some good moments. I think we'll always focus on his field goal percentage or his fouls but I think if you kind of watch the whole body of work on him, I think there's a lot of good things that you can pull up. So I think there are things as far as with your younger players that you should be happy about.
That naturally led me to my final thing. Anthony Edwards, been better lately. He's been in the starting lineup, playing bigger minutes. The numbers have gone up. The efficiency has gone up, at least from where it was. Big picture, when they took him number 1 overall, everybody had a lot of opinions about him. Where do you see his career in 5 years? Does he make it in a big way? Is he not quite that guy? What do you think of him overall?
Well, he'll always have the number 1 pick label hung over his head, right? Forever. That's the cards that you're dealt. All him, Wiseman, and Ball will probably be compared to each other. Like, I don't know if we're at the Luka Trae Young stage, but that's kind of where that's just the nature of the beast. And I kind of label guys, from franchise, all-star, top starter. I think he could be a top starter in this league. I don't know if he's got franchise, and hey, he's only in year one, franchise level making, but I don't know how many players in this draft did have franchise level, talent here. So I think he could be a top starter, which means you're kind of your number 3 guy. But I know people want to compare the 3 players and kind of give out grades and say Minnesota should take Wiseman or they should take Ball. And we're looking at where Edwards is here, but I always say, let's just play this out. Let's play it out for the next, 3 or 4 years and see where these players are. I mean, they're so young here, and I want to see him go through, if there's a type of summer league or a type of off season where, he could really, we've seen guys take off in year 2 here, and there's going to be a learning curve here. We've already seen it already.
Bobby, great stuff. Thanks for joining me here today on the Daily Delivery podcast. Maybe we can do this again towards the deadline, especially if the Wolves shock you and shock the world and make some kind of massive move at the end of March.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Take care. Great chatting with Bobby Marks. Always love talking to him. I think he's right. I don't think there is a blockbuster in the Wolves' immediate future. I think they did a lot of that a year ago, and now it's time to figure out what they have. But, man, I'm not convinced right now that this path is going to be the right one. I guess I'm more on the path now of waiting to be proved wrong than anything else. So we'll see how the rest of this season plays out. Happy to be joined today by Jamal Mashburn Jr., freshman for the Gophers. Big game Thursday against Purdue. Jamal, how are you doing? Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm doing well. How about you?
Awesome. This is not any fault of your own, but I grew up watching your dad play, so watching you play makes me feel exceedingly old. I'm sure you hear that a lot. Your dad, I want to talk a little bit. Your dad played for Rick Pitino at Kentucky. You are his son, no doubt, Jamal Mashburn Jr., and you were coached by Rick's son, Richard, at Minnesota. Do you and Richard Pitino talk about your fathers and those relationships much at all?
Yeah, we've talked about it mainly just in the beginning of the year, just when I first got up here. But we haven't talked about it much recently. I know they stay in contact, him and my dad, and also Rick and my dad. I've heard from him a little bit. So it's just a nice connection that we all have. That's good. So
how important were those relationships as you were considering what schools you wanted to go to, and just, kind of knowing that, your dad could vouch for Richard's dad in some way?
Yeah. It actually didn't play as big as a role as people think it is.
Okay.
And think that it does, just because I had to just take that out of it and just realize that, I have a bigger goal and an end goal for myself. And, whatever situation, that may be, whether would it have been Minnesota or somebody somewhere else, I just had to take that part of it out. It's a great kind of coincidence and kind of good story to tell, to my kids, when I'm older, but I had to just, focus on myself and just do what's best for myself.
Obviously, because of COVID, unfortunately, your dad hasn't been able to watch you really in person during your freshman season. Nobody's really been able to watch anything. How difficult has that been, and how have you been able to stay in touch with him?
Yeah, he's my dad's my best friend, so we call each other every day, whether it be through FaceTime or Skype or something like that. But we always figure out a way to communicate with each other. And he'll actually be up here the 19th. I think we play the 20th. We play Illinois, so he'll be up here. I'll be able to see him and everything.
Oh, that's awesome! So, that first time you see him for a while, or?
Yeah, last time I saw him was in August when I moved down here. Got my apartment set up and everything. So this will be the first time since then. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, looking forward to that. Like I said at the outset, big game Thursday against Purdue. You guys kind of started out on fire at Purdue a couple weeks back, but ended up losing, I think, by 19. When you have a game like that, what's the mindset when you're going into a rematch, especially one, kind of with some significant implications in the big picture?
Yeah, we know what we got to get better on, and we know what we have to do as a team to go on a run, especially in these dog days of January and February, getting close to tournament time. So. We know what we have to do. We've been working hard in practice and, doing the little things that, we needed to get better on. So, yes, we just were focusing on that. That's kind of more the morale and attitude of the team.
This game is at home, of course, Williams Arena. That's been far friendlier to you guys this year. You haven't won yet on the road. Sorry to remind you. How tired are you both of that fact, period, and of hearing about it?
To be honest, I'm very tired. I'm not really a person that likes losing at all, and especially on the road. But it happens to, some teams and stuff like that. Just got to be able to push through and work through it. Because at the end of the day, adversity and, trial and error only makes you better. So
yeah, absolutely. You've played 19 games this year, all off the bench. You're getting about 17 minutes a game. How do you feel like your game has grown so far in college? And what do you feel like, in these years and, especially these next couple months that you have, what do you feel like you need to work on this freshman year and beyond?
Yeah, I mean, I think I just, I've been able to grow. My IQ has been able to expand, especially me being a point guard, becoming a point guard and stuff like that. Just my overall IQ. I just want to continue to get better as a shooter all around. Just get better at everything. I'm a worker, so everything's going to get better. And
a lot of players are all about social media these days. I'm on Twitter all the time, but I go on Twitter to your account and I see that you have tweeted exactly 8 times in the 5 years since you joined. How have you been able to stay away? How are you are you wired a little differently than some of your teammates and some of the other, folks in college right now?
Yeah, I mean, I try to, social media is cool and everything, but honestly, it could be a little bit of a distraction. It brings in a lot of, unnecessary things in your life and creates unnecessary thoughts in your head that maybe you can't control at the time. Just us being teenagers and, being consumed with the things that we look at. So, I mean, I just try to stay away from it. And plus, I do a lot of journaling and reading. So I don't really have the motive to really get on social media like that. So,
man, you're like way more mature than me. What's the best thing you've read lately?
The best thing I've read lately, Percy Jackson, and I forgot which. There's like 7 books for that one. But awesome. That was the last one I read. I think it was like the 4th book.
Okay, I haven't. Let's finish this up this way. Since I'm just getting to know you a little bit better. What's one thing about you that you think would surprise people if you told them?
One fact about me. A lot of people when they see me on the court, they think I'm like a very angry, mean person.
Why? Why do they think that?
Like a lot of people when they meet me, they're shocked that I'm, so like nice and I guess, bubbly and happy. But I guess I'm just hard to approach, I guess. But I'm just a friendly guy. I like to laugh, joke, kick it,
So you feel like you feel like your true nature is a little bit different than your exterior?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Cool. Hey, Jamal, best of luck in the game on Thursday, and thank you so much for joining me here today on the podcast. I'll probably include you in the Twitter promotion of this, so go ahead and make this your 9th tweet if you want to.
I got you. That'll be my 9th one. I got you.
I'm going to hold him to it. I'm going to go check out his Twitter today. I'm going to make sure that he is having his 9th tweet. He's got a long way to catch up to me. In the 80,000 range, I think. So a long way to go there, but I'm going to make sure that Jamal Mashburn Jr. Manages to tweet today. Let's finish up with the cooler. Nelson Cruz had his news conference to announce his signing with the Twins on Wednesday. That wasn't necessarily huge news. We already knew that. The bigger maybe nugget that came from that was Twins Chief Baseball Officer Derek Falvey acknowledging that, quote, the heavy lifting is over in terms of roster construction this offseason, and, quote, we've got a lot of our significant expenditures done, but we are in conversations maybe with some ways to round out the roster or other potential fits at a lower dollar amount. I think it's possible right now, as you think about the Twins, to be both happy or encouraged by the moves they have made so far this year. I think the J. Happ signing was a good one. I think the Andrelton Simmons signing was a very good one. I like some of the things they've done. I'm bringing back Nelson Cruz, obviously. I think it's possible, though, to also simultaneously feel like it's not enough. I feel like there's still one really good pitcher away, and maybe that pitcher comes in June or July. Maybe it does become one of those young pitchers that emerges, like Falvey was saying also in today. By the way, bearded Falvey, loving the yacht rock Derek Falvey look. But I'm concerned that they're still a frontline starter away, and a lot of teams are. But if this is the same roster they carry into the postseason, more or less, especially the pitching staff, I just don't think it's going to be enough. That will do it for today. If you like what you hear, please download, subscribe, write a review, and always, always, always read Star Tribune at StarTribune.com. Tomorrow I will be joined by Dennis Anderson, outdoors columnist and editor from the Star Tribune, for a great conversation about the Gunflint Trail, and Randy Johnson, who covers hockey, for a talk about Gophers men's hockey. Thanks again for listening to the Daily Delivery podcast, and we'll talk to you again tomorrow.